The reality we live in can be a very strange place. Most of the time, fact being stranger than fiction. How will we ever start to understand this reality we live in unless we question everything? Join me and a guest as we unravel the mysteries of this reality, one topic at a time. This is Inquiries of Our Reality with Shayn Jones.
Reality isn't what it seems. Abductees taking aboard a craft with a tractor beam. Is life a simulation or an astral dream? Aliens travel through black holes in different galaxies. Life is a bizarre odyssey with a mic talking about philosophy. Well, Bigfoot is stalking campers as a Wendigo walks through the woods of sharpened antlers, using a Ouija board to talk to the dead like a necromancer. There's so many questions and not enough answers. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to Inquiries of Our Reality. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to Inquiries of Our Reality.
What is up, Inquirers, and welcome to the expanse of deep, open-minded conversation. I'm the one they call Shayn, and today for you guys, I have a fellow podcaster who's been doing some research that somewhat side tangents one of the recent theories I'd put together for a recent episode of Bizarre Encounters. We, of course, go into different facets of it, and of course, it all starts off with his own personal UFO experience, which also plays a key role in the rest of the conversation. But before we get into that one, just have two quick pieces of news and updates. The first one is that Inquiries of Our Reality and Bizarre Encounters are now available on iHeartRadio. So for all the listeners out there that listen on iHeartRadio, you guys can now listen on that app. And the second piece of news and updates is the next event I will be at, which is Snarly Yow's Cryptid Halloween 3. That one is going to be Saturday, October 26th from 10 a.m. until 5 p.m. Free admission, of course, and that's going to be at the Ranson Civic Center in Ranson, West Virginia. I'm going to be vending, speaking, and emceeing that event. It's going to be a lot of fun. Orin's going to be there with me, and we're, of course, going to have a couple of our other friends in the community, such as Kevin from Where the Weird Ones Are, and Rick from IKNOWSQUATCH, which, of course, is one of the sponsors of the show. But I'm looking forward to seeing you guys out there, so if any of you guys are able to make it out, let me know and shoot me a message, because I'd absolutely love to know you by face and name. And just a quick message before we get into the conversation today. This podcast has a strong focus on community engagement, so I encourage all listeners to share their own experiences and research on the show. So if anybody has an encounter that they would like to report, you guys can report those to OMMencounterreports@outlook.com, or you guys can go to the link tree, and there is a specific submission form for that. I am going to be looking into seeing if I can set up some kind of voicemail box, if that's any easier for you guys to be able to call into, but more updates on that one soon. And if anybody would like to be a guest on the show, you guys can email me at inquiriesofourrealitypodcast@outlook.com. Or again, there is also a submission form on the link tree that says contact me. And of course, every single thing that I mention is all available on the link tree, which is available down in the show description. And with that, let's get into the show. Please welcome to the show, Tim Constantine from Sixth Sensory Podcast. How's it going today, man?
Good. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Absolute pleasure to have you on the show. And I think this one actually got connected through Deplorable Janet. I think she shot me a message and said, you might be somebody I might be interested in having on the show. So anytime Janet gives me some advice, I'll definitely follow the trail.
Yeah, she set this up, and I've been on her show. She's been on my show. And I think you were one of the first people that she mentioned that I should talk to. So I'm happy it worked out.
I think it was about a month ago. So also relatively speedy as far as like I usually schedule a couple of months out. So we lucked out that we were able to do it within like a month or so of actually talking for the first time. So
yeah, that was quick. She came on, Janet came on. We talked about medicine and how our current situation with medicine has been hijacked by the Rockefeller. So that was a fun conversation.
About to open up a can of worms before we even get into what we're about to talk about today, man.
Never mind.
We didn't talk about anything. I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe we can get into that on the tail end. Maybe that's something we could bring back up, but keep that one in mind just in case.
Well, I wanted to do that show because I haven't touched that topic as much as I would like to. You know, normally what I do with my show is hidden history, ancient technology, archaeology, giants, UFOs, and, you know, loosely paranormal. I don't go too deep into paranormal, but I touch on it occasionally.
Kind of the stuff more connected to like sciences, I assume, is kind of your forte.
Yeah, when I started out, I was really science heavy, and I've kind of backed off of that for now because, I mean, I don't want to tell this story again. Everybody's heard it 1,000 times, but
I have not though. So
that's right. I had a UFO sighting right when I decided to start a podcast, and it was a very synchro, mystical type of an affair.
Let's say you can't just drop a UFO event and not have to tell me about it. Now you're trapped. Now you got to tell me about it.
Okay. For everybody who's listening who maybe has heard this, I didn't mean to tell this. I will tell it, but I knew I was going to start a podcast. I was on the phone with my friend back in North Carolina. We were talking about the show. We hadn't started yet, but we were talking about it. And, you know, he was going to help me get started and everything. He goes, hold on a second. Something happens. And he goes, let me call you right back. Let me call you. Actually, before he gets off the phone, he goes, I just saw these lights. I just saw like 7 or 8 lights in the sky and they just disappeared. Then he gets off the phone. So I'm, you know, it's a cliffhanger. So I'm in my living room pacing around waiting to get back on the phone with him. So I step outside and I'm outside. It's a nice clear night. I step outside. I've been out there for 15 to 20 seconds and I see a orb pass across my field of view about 200 yards away. And what was strange about this was it came from within the atmosphere. It didn't come down like a shooting star. It didn't kind of, you know, fly at an angle like a plane would. It was too organic to be a drone because it had an arc to it. So it went like this. It went up, it arced over, and it went across the street, the trees. It went over the trees across the street, excuse me, and it kind of arced down. There's another neighborhood over there. And it starts here and it arcs up and it just arches over. Perfectly in my field of view, it blinks at me 3 times. 3 long blinks. And it's this bright orb. It's one of the weirdest, strangest, most bizarre lights I think I've ever seen. There was something organic about it, and it was a very like a bright, clean white light. And I don't know. It just seemed intentional. So I get back on the phone with him, and I'm like, you're not going to believe this. So I tell him what happened. He tells me what happened to him. He sees 8 lights, 7, 8 lights, you know, they like almost like a V, I think, in the sky. They shine. He sees them. They disappear. Then he hears an explosion at his neighbor's house, and he hears people scream.
It's like something out of a movie, man.
Yeah. And we never did find out what the explosion was. We thought maybe, you know, we were theorizing that maybe it was a propane tank or something along those lines, but we never figured that out. And I think he also saw a flash of light, like a bonfire or something when that explosion happened. So, but here's the weird part about this. He was in North Carolina. I'm in Tennessee. We're talking about doing a show about the supernatural, and we were going to touch on UFOs too. That was a part of the plan. And how much of that, what happened to us, could possibly be a coincidence? So when I launched this show, I launched into it UFO heavy because that had just happened to me. Like that was fresh on my plate. So like my first 9 to 10 episodes, I really, really dug into UFOs more than I had planned to. And because of this incident, right? And, you know, now I think, and I honestly believe this, I think I got played. I think this Keelian conundrum, this intelligence, that's not human, but it exists alongside of us as an intelligence. Whatever this is, set me up to talk about UFOs. I do feel that way.
Did you have any experiences with anything bizarre before that?
Yes.
Okay, so I was going to say, I was wondering if it was one of those things where like you guys were on the fence about it and it was one of those things where somebody just has that experience to kind of like push them over the edge on it. But just another possible theory on this whole thing, they talk about this whole like elevating the vibration, elevating the consciousness of the human race. And this seems to be something that's like universal as far as like the alien phenomenon goes. So, I mean, if there is like an intelligence factor where they are keeping somewhat tabs on people, you know, if they are on that side of, you know, trying to push this like expansion of human intelligence, you know, it's just another light that flicks up, that, you know, that somebody becomes like aware. So it's one of those things where maybe they figure that if somebody is about to go and do a show, that's just another person that's speaking out about this kind of stuff and raising the elevation of everybody as a whole. And it may seem minuscule that it's just one particular person, but one particular person, even if it's a small show, they reach 50 people. That's 50 more people that are now aware of whatever the concept is that they might need to be aware of in order to expand human consciousness. Cause it's definitely like a step-by-step process. So, I mean, again, there's a bunch of podcasters out there, you know, it doesn't seem like maybe anything special if a podcaster has an experience, but for every one of those podcasters, you know, they're reaching an audience, and for every bit of audience that's being touched, again, that's now an expansion of this idea of elevating the consciousness and the understanding of the weird that's going on in our universe around us. So again, one of those events that may have purposely happened, or again, it was just one of those like weird, perfect timing things. But the farther I dive into all this weird, bizarre stuff, you know, I don't necessarily believe in coincidences. It's more like synchronicities or things that seem to be for a purpose. And just life in general, though, it just seems like there's these chain of events that are intended to happen on purpose. And if one didn't happen, then the other aspect of it wouldn't happen. It's just, it starts a chain of effects. So like you said, you know, you were about to start a podcast, you had this thing, then you went heavy for 10 episodes. You know, maybe there was some really important information, you know, you covered in those first 10 episodes that maybe you didn't even necessarily realize the importance of while you were doing it, but you would have never even talked about it in the first place if it wasn't for, again, having just this perfect experience that happened when it was supposed to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in regards to all the knowledge that I was able to kind of gather throughout working on those 9 to 10 episodes, I am glad that I went down that road, because it was like ufology 101, which I had pretty much already done that course, you know, because I'm already interested in the subject, right? And I've seen all the documentaries. You got
to bring everybody else up to speed.
Yes, but I had to go at it from a different angle, and I found out new and exciting bits and pieces of information. So I'm glad I did that. And I just had to it just forced me to recalibrate the podcast about, 15 episodes in. I realized, okay, I'm not just going to be a UFO show. So I've got to, that was a learning curve. I was like, I got to figure out how I'm going to incorporate my other interests into this show. And it worked out, and like, cause
you kind of go in pockets sometimes, though. It's like you get heavy into one thing and it leads into this, but then that leads into something else. So it seems like most shows, it's kind of like a progression of research where, you feel like you're getting too heavy into something, but it ends up leading into another trail. So it's like, just because you're hitting UFOs for an extended period of time doesn't mean you have to be stuck with UFOs forever, because it's going to eventually start turning into face stuff. It's going to start turning into angelic stuff. Like, you can't dive into the UFO phenomenon without starting to at least hit the fringes of diving into some of the face stuff.
Yeah, man, I couldn't agree more with that. And It's all connected for me. I don't I'm not in any camp. I don't live in any group. I see Bigfoot, UFOs, paranormal, and a lot of other things I'll throw in that basket, but I do see them all in the same basket, oftentimes fairies as well. And, I think for me, it's the dance that I do is, how does conspiracy fit into all that as well? Because after 2020, I went down the rabbit hole. I had felt as if I was being lied to for a while. And in 2020, it clicked. Okay, 9/11, 2008, every war that's been fought in my life and my parents' life, all these events are not what they are portrayed to be. And on the contrary, I think they're orchestrated power plays. And so in many ways, coming to the realization that there's a hidden truth behind things, that's influenced me, that's influenced my show. And it's not in every episode, but I do try to incorporate it because I think once you start seeing the world a certain way before your family does, before your friends do, it can get lonely. So I try to accommodate people who have had revelations, and I try to accommodate people who think outside the nightly news.
I mean, honestly, I feel like it's one of those things that you start diving into Sasquatch, you start diving into UFOs, especially UFOs, dude. And the conspiracy thing just ends up kind of rolling off the back end. Like my other show, Bizarre Encounters, we kind of came into the intention that we wanted to cover all of these weird topics, but not get too heavy into the conspiratorial stuff because we didn't want to start separating people and stuff. But as soon as you start going on that path, it's almost like an undeniable aspect where you have to start bringing stuff up, because it's like, it's almost better to kind of do it that way where you almost do it piece by piece instead of going too heavy, because then if there's people that kind of need to be kind of walked through stuff, you can't just like drop a knowledge bomb on somebody too heavy if they just don't have any mentality of that. But, if you start trickling kind of stuff in piece by piece of noticing like, hey, this ain't quite right, this ain't quite right, this ain't quite right, then it's almost like the audience kind of step by step grows with you with it. But again, with the conspiracy aspect of it, it's almost like hard to deny when you're in this realm of podcasts, because as soon as you start diving into the UFO stuff, the first thing that starts getting into it is the government intervention as far as like trying to hide it, trying to take these weapons, trying to take these unidentified flying objects and trying to, reverse engineer them so they can create stuff for their own military. And I mean, I got some other weird connections that I brought up before we got into the show, because I know there's a topic we're going to come into today, and it might kind of full circle come around back to this. But I mean, even within like the UFO phenomenon, there's also the other side of the conspiracy that I kind of brought up, that I think a lot of the UFO stuff may potentially be human intervention, but they're hiding it under this masquerade of UFOs, because you can't just abduct people and do random experiments to people. But if you hide under this facade of it's an alien, who's going to take credibility for that? It's like, oh, some guy comes out and says, I got abducted by aliens. There's a handful of people, of course, everybody in this community is going to sit down and listen to the guy, but the average person isn't going to. So essentially they can go around and do whatever experiments they want on whoever they want to do them on and have no tie back to themselves. But
yeah. And conspiracy ties in. I think all the UFO stuff that we've already talked about, and I'll just tell people right now, we didn't have a conversation about a specific topic. Like, you don't know what topic I was thinking about talking about here today, but funny enough, we're already landing on it, because I was going to talk about UFOs and UFO related technology.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. And we are back. So let's hop right in.
But let me say this, because this kind of goes back to being on Deplorable Janet's show. I was about to check out and delete my social media before I started podcasting. I was, like I said, I was starting to see like this fakeness and this theater going on around me. So I was thinking about just checking out and going back to Appalachia. And I was either going to start like a tea herb health goods shop, which I talked about with Janet, because she's all about the herbs, and we had a great conversation with that. So I think that plays into this too. But for some reason, I felt inclined to try podcasting. So back to conspiracy for a second. In doing research for shows, I started noticing this form of mainstream propaganda that affects the information throughout the internet.
Oh my God. As soon as you see it, it is so undeniable, dude. Like I watch all these political ads and I get angry, not at the fact of like on this side or that side, but it's just the stupidity of the propaganda that they can play on people, that people just believe this shit without actually looking into any aspect of it. Like 90% of these political ads you see now, you look up any of the information and it's all like false information or skewed information. Like it gets to the point where once you see it, it's like, it almost becomes like laughable. Like I watch the news and I don't take any of this shit seriously because I know it's all like a play, but it's like, you know, you listen to like some of the guys that cover that stuff really, really well, just breaking down the news and stuff. And it's just like, it turns into a comedy podcast real quick, even though it's intended to be news and political. Cause it's just, there's nothing you can do about it besides laugh at this certain point. Cause it's just so blatantly obvious and stupid once you see it.
Yeah. I think us having shows, I think we might see it a little bit more clear sometimes because we have a show, we do research. When you research, you run into this stuff. And I mean, and once you see it, like you're saying, once you see it, it's so blatant that you can't unsee it. You know, there's these false narratives everywhere being used by the establishment on the internet and on the nightly news. And, you know, I started to see it, especially with fact checkers, Wikipedia, and online magazines who, you know, these online magazines, their articles magically get moved to the top of the Google searches. And in a nutshell, what I'm seeing is articles that tell us one thing happened when, in fact, another thing either did happen or probably happened. We're not getting the true story. And like recently, a good example of this that's come back up for me. I know the show's been out for a while, but it's Hunting Hitler. The History Channel released a show called Hunting Hitler. They put out 4 seasons of research and information that lay out how Hitler probably didn't commit suicide in a bunker in 1945. And, you know, it's 4 seasons worth of material. They show sources, they show evidence. It's legit. Yet the mainstream Google, Wikipedia, major magazines still maintain that Hitler definitely committed suicide in a bunker. And, you know, that's going to, I mean, I'm thinking about pulling up a picture here, but I'm not going to do it. I took a screenshot the other day of when you if you Google, how did Hitler die? The first thing that comes up is like the AI version of him dying in a bunker. And then the number 2 option is Wikipedia. You go into that and they're also saying he died in the bunker. So
Google's all controlled narrative to begin with, man. It's like, think about how much stuff gets manipulated on Google that, like, you know, there'll be like a ban that'll come out for something that's named after a conspiracy. And then anytime you search that, you're just going to get that ban now. You know, like perfect example, Foo Fighters. You try to look up Foo Fighters since we're talking about like the World War stuff. You know, you look that up, you get the band. Like it's almost impossible to find like Foo Fighter stuff until you start getting into the far pages on Google or you start using a different web browser.
Yeah. It's that. It's like there's like this weird controlled cover up like that, where you don't get the results you're searching for. It's almost like people have named bands and albums and artwork and all this stuff after like Roswell or whatever. So you don't actually get the real Roswell story. That's a bad example, but you know, I mean, have you seen, I'm sure you've seen lately going around like the montage clips of all the different newscasters and they're saying the same thing on different channels.
Dude, like I see that stuff all the time, dude. I listen to No Agenda, one of my favorite podcasts, and they do the 3x3s where it's like the same thing. And you see this like every other episode, word for word, just exact same script.
Yeah. That's a similar situation to what I see going on with the information online when I research. And just like Hunting Hitler, just like there's 2 narratives there now, but one gets all the spotlight. I mean, I think the same is true for the Nazi bell and anti-gravity. It's just like the death of Hitler. You're told one thing, but the truth is possibly much different. So that's what I've been looking into lately.
Have you looked into, as I don't want to jump too far ahead because I'm sure you might get back to this at some point, but you've looked into the Kecksburg UFO incident as far as like...
I actually have that in my outline.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so I don't want to jump too far ahead. I was going to bring that one up, but I'll let you kind of step into it.
No, I'm sure it's not. I don't have the outline in front of me, but like, I was going to kind of do a similar show to this anyway, probably for my YouTube. And Kecksburg is definitely on the outline, man. So you're hitting it, man. We're dancing around the same fire here.
I think that your research and my research are definitely going to start coming to tie back together here, because one of my recent episodes that I did that I compiled all this information was basically linking MK Ultra running experiments all the way through with all this Nazi technology into the current UFO situation, then basically stating that I think that a huge portion of the UFO abduction experiences are actually human related and continued Nazi experiments.
Yeah, I kind of want to hear more about that too anyways. But I'm glad you brought up Kecksburg, man. That's crazy, because we'll get back to that, I think. And, one of the main things that I wanted to do, I started researching Nazi Bell, and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, because I love World War II just in general history. So like, I know that Germany was 30, 40, sometimes even like almost 50 years ahead of everyone else back in the 30s, 40s. And, a good example of that would be NASA and rocketry. It comes out of 40s Germany. CERN and the particle collider comes out of 40s Germany through guys like Rolf Wilderow. The tech for the atomic bomb, that comes out of 40s Germany. And the tokamak and nuclear fusion comes out of 1940s Germany through guys like Manfred von Ardeen. And I think he's one of the guys who knew about the anti-gravity tech and the Nazi Bell. And one of the things that Google and these modern magazine articles and websites will absolutely bash if you look for this is the Nazi Bell.
Dude, you find the goofiest photos if you try to actually look that thing up. Like, it's all these like caricature, just like ridiculous looking photos.
Yeah, and as you know, it's also called Die Glock. And if you Wikipedia Die Glock, in parentheses next to it is conspiracy theory. That's how hard. That's how hard they go at this. According to the internet, it's purely fabricated conspiracy. But I've been looking into it, and I think it may have actually existed. I just think it went to Russia.
I mean, even at the root of it, though, regardless, like obviously the Nazis are diving into the occult. So whether or not you want to consider if it actually worked, you still have to consider what the Nazis are looking into and the potentially the type of things that they would try to build. So regardless if it worked or not, I definitely think that it was something that the Nazis had created just, again, because of what they were into diving into.
Yes, 100%. They were very much into the occult. I'm working on a book about that right now, Nazi occultism. This is just a nice little fun little side tangent I found myself on because this stuff is so crazy. I wasn't planning on diving into Die Glock. It's all over YouTube. It's all over the internet. It's considered a conspiracy. Everybody, if you ever talk about Die Glock in a forum anywhere, you're just going to get bashed. These pillars of the establishment show up out of the woodwork on these forums and will just, hate mail you to death, basically, if you talk about this. So I wasn't really going to go there, but
if you get bashed, though, that's just more of a reason, because it's almost like either one, it's completely ridiculous, but if it seems like it's something in the line of probability, then you might be onto something.
Yeah. Smoke, there's fire. And like the clues for me go back to this guy I mentioned, Manfred von Ardeen. He's a German physicist. For 10 years after World War II, he was taken to the Soviet Union to work on their atomic bomb project. Basically, the Soviets pull up in war-torn Germany after they've bombed it all to hell. They pick this guy up in a military convoy, and they sit him in the Jeep, and they say, "You're working for us now." They did all this before the Americans even got on site. So he's spirited away by the Russians before anybody even knows about it. And once he's in Russia, he proceeds to do his work. He gets a Stalin Award for his work. Colleagues start hearing his war stories, and they start picking up on the fact that he's talking about Die Glock. he knew something about this. The colleagues said in interviews that he was a witness to Die Glock back in Germany. So the speculation here is that he possibly worked on it as well. He just didn't want to own up to. He was comfortable more with like being like, yeah, I saw it, you know. But he probably did more than just, you know, view this thing. So he's one guy you can look into that raises questions. Hans Kammler is another. He's an SS Obergruppenführer. He was over the Nazi secret weapons project. He was a civil engineer. We don't know when he died because he just flat out disappeared.
Like most of these guys, it's all like conspiracy on their actual death to begin with too.
Yeah. I mean, this guy was he killed enough people to where he may have been unable to get a paperclip deal for the U.S. So I think he may have disappeared somewhere in Russia where they could just keep him underground. Because he's working underground for the Germans already. Like, you know, we know during the war, he's over this top secret V weapons program. And this is what's interesting. He was said to be working on anti-gravity technology derived from the work of Nikola Tesla.
I wouldn't even be surprised if he got snatched up by the Americans. Because, I mean, even if they on paper couldn't take him in, I mean, you know how the government is. They're just going to file him under some black budget program that's even deeper down the line, and nobody even knows that he exists within the country. If he has a point of interest, it doesn't matter how many people he's killed. Like, if they can produce something that they want, they look over all that.
Yeah, you're right. I was thinking like they couldn't Von Braun him, they couldn't put him out in public because Von Braun had a war criminal history that they thought that they could clean up. This guy, I don't think they could clean his up. But
just depends on how deep they put him. Are we going to put you in the front, kind of, or are we going to put you in the back?
See, that's what I'm saying. If we got him, or you know, I think the Russians probably got him, but because he was on turf that the Russians took. So wherever he went, I think he went underground because what he did for the Nazis was he worked on a completely underground facility with tunnels and facilities. Like the workers at that camp, they all worked underground. And, you know, he answered to Himmler as well, talking about the occult, right? Himmler's a big occultist of the SS. This guy worked and answered directly to Himmler. And I just think that, yeah, maybe they spirited him away to another underground facility, basically. Just kind of like this other guy I found. He's another person of interest. His name is Jacob Sporenberg. He's another Nazi. He was hung at Nuremberg. So a lot of the secrets just kind of died with him. But he was one of the main Nazis overseeing some very Nazi Bell type work at another super weapons facility where they were... at his facility, they were focusing on wonder weapons. They were desperately trying to build these wonder weapons to help Hitler win the war because they needed a miracle weapon because when Germany opened up a second front with Russia, they were stretched themselves too thin. So they really needed a miracle. And like that's another reason why I think that they would have gone there and looked at this anti-gravity craft. You know, we know they had wonder weapons. So, and they were pretty wild. Like one was a flying rocket that used alcohol and copper as fuel. And, you know, but at this particular facility, Sporenberg was operating at a castle. And it's in modern day Poland. And it's called Kashaw's Castle. It's right on the Polish-Czech border. And they had this Der Riese project going on. Der Riese means the giant in German. And again, this is a big, gorgeous castle, man. And there's an extensive underground labyrinth of tunnel systems connected to the castle. And like, you can go online, you can even take tours now because it was like secret for 70 years, but I think they recently opened those tunnels up. But the Nazis were working on something down there that was giving off large amounts of radiation. I think it was radiation because it affected the skin of the scientists. And people who worked there, they described whatever this was that was putting out radiation, they described it as being bell-shaped.
When it was affecting their skin, was it like the sunburn thing, or was it doing something totally different to them?
In the accounts that I read, it was melting skin.
Ooh.
So I don't know if it was radiation. I'm just assuming that it was, but the clues that it kind of looks like radiation or something weird that we don't know about. I'm not sure. Yeah, the skin was like melty is what was happening.
Well, I mean, the other aspect with the Nazi bell was the fact that they say it could theoretically like time travel too. So, I mean, assumably if something is time traveling, that would probably be something that's somewhat radioactive, because assumably you're splitting particles, you're opening something up by splitting particles. And in turn, when you start creating things like that and creating like a shockwave from the splitting, I mean, it would make sense that, you know, you don't know what's coming out of the other side. It could potentially melt some skin, because I assume that, you know, theoretically, I'm assuming, I don't know this for sure, but like CERN, for example, if they didn't have all of the outside perimeter stuff set up, I'm sure that there would be some type of like radioactive blast that could potentially like melt people's skin from the impact site of where they clash the two particles together inside that system.
Yeah,
because assumably it worked just like an A bomb. I mean, it's an A bomb would melts the skin off before, and then, you know, before it does anything else, it'll completely like shred and melt the skin down.
I think that they were working with uranium as well, and you know, we don't know all the effects that has, but I can imagine a situation where that would do a similar amount of damage to the human body. And you know, I think, like I mentioned, Manfred, and I think some of these other Nazi scientists, I think what this boils down to is, well, we know they helped develop the Russian tokamak right after World War II. The Russian tokamak becomes nuclear fusion. And the Russians developed this type of nuclear first before the U.S. did, because they got the Nazis who knew how to do it.
And it all comes back from weapon placement that they end up later on using for power. Because like most inventions, like the origin of what it originally starts as is intended to be some form of a weapon, and then they figure out other potential uses for it afterwards.
Yes. That's the progression that this took. It's taken different forms, but I think it started with the Nazi bell, and they used the technology for various other projects. And I think all of this just kind of over the years has something to do with why Americans dismiss the bell, because we didn't get the tech the Russians did, in my opinion. And I don't even think that it's like a pride thing. I just think that we're not aware of the backstory. I think the bell was this early version of a tokamak, because that's what Manfred was doing in Germany. And especially at the end there, before the tokamak, I think it was all Nazi bell work. And I think that bell technology just became a nuclear fusion reactor.
We will be right back after this brief commercial break. But just a quick reminder, if you guys want to stay up to date on the show, you guys can always go and follow Inquiries of Our Reality and Open Minds Media on Instagram, Facebook, Discord, YouTube, and TikTok. Now feel free to fast forward through these commercials so we can hop right back into the show. And we are back, so let's get back to it.
Tokamaks use a powerful magnetic field to confine plasma or mercury in the shape of a torus, right? And a giant bell would perfectly facilitate that type of toroidal chamber. It would, you could fit a torus right up in a bell. And I think that they called this Derisi project. I think they called it the Giant, as in like the Giant project. Like, this is going to win the war for us, because the names, they did their names like that. They just found in 2016 a North Pole Nazi base, and the Nazis named it Scheissgraber, which is German for treasure hunter, because that's what they were doing. They were up there looking for Atlantis Hyperborean treasure. So they just called it treasure hunter. And I think they just called this the Giant, because it's this giant world or war winning, technology.
I wonder if they're working on this at the end of the war with the intention that if they were able to potentially time travel with it, that they could go back to those crucial moments and try to redo these battles.
Yeah, that's like the man in the high castle stuff right there.
But theoretically, though, weird thing to think about. I mean, there are some people that believe that the only way that you could potentially time travel is forward. So, I mean, with the other possible connection that we might have in the U.S. to the Die Glocken, that might potentially make sense that you could only potentially go forward. And you can't actually go back because those events have already been played out.
That's interesting. I think that was what Philip K. Dick was talking about in Man in the High Castle. I don't know if you've ever read that book. It's also a TV show.
I don't think I have, but I assume the concept is probably the idea that you like entrap this bubble that basically like holds this specific moment in time, and then everything else is able to progress through it, but you wouldn't be able to go back. It's more so just holding this one fixed point at a specific time while everything else moves around it.
Mm-hmm. He had it, I think, where they were going forward in time or back. I don't remember which one it was, but they were either going back or forward to keep trying to change the outcome of the war. But it was you mentioned CERN earlier, and the way it was shown in this show was it was this giant hole underground, like a underground warehouse where they had this particle collider looking thing, and they were blasting open a dimension, and the Nazis were like suiting up and going, through this portal, man. It was wild, right? That's in that show. It's like Philip K. Dick. It's really strange because he said that when he wrote that book, because it was a novel first, he found that he was writing about things by memory, but that it was a memory that he had from an alternate dimension, because in his memory, he remembered a scenario in which the Nazis won the war and they split the U.S. in half. Germany took the West Coast. I'm sorry, Japan took the West Coast, Germany took the East Coast, and they just had a line right down the middle of the country. And Philip K. Dick says he has memories of the country being this way. So, I mean, pretty wild stuff, right?
All the Nazis escape into a parallel universe. They actually won the war. So, again, the whole time idea is necessarily that maybe they were trying to, actually time travel, but actually, open up a portal into another dimension where it's a different time that the Nazis actually won the war because the battle may have split. Because you get into the whole, multiple dimensions concept, and they talk about these, fixed points where they're, crucial moments. And when these crucial moments happen, it creates the split timelines. So when you're talking about that whole correcting the events thing, hopping onto those specific points and hoping that you lean the way that, the reality splits into those split dimensions, and to the point where the Nazis would have won rather than the US would have won. So both timelines would exist, but you would put yourself on that other timeline, even though the rest of the world is still on their other timeline that you came from.
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, that they had this appreciation, and this is also, I would consider this to be some hidden history for you. They had this fascination and appreciation for Mercury. And there was another facility, it was at Dessau, it was near Linz in Germany. There's blueprints from there of unknown propulsion engines that run on Mercury, right? So, and in alchemy, if you take mercury and you swirl it around, you get a toroidal field. You get a tokamak. When you swirl the mercury around, it creates voltage. I think they figured that out. And for me, that's where this got really interesting, because in the old ancient Vedic texts, they talk about Hindu flying machines that run on mercury. They're called vimanas. So I do think that the Nazis were interested in the applied science version of that. And
I think that people think they were they're definitely looking into the occult, but I also think that people need to take into consideration that they did have a lot of scientists, and a lot of people now are talking about this whole idea of people miscommunicating the things they were seeing But I assume that a lot of these Nazi scientists were aware of that. And when they saw, oh, look, here's a culture that has some type of flying thing. Here's a culture that has some type of flying thing. Here's a culture that has some type of flying thing. They all look like they function relatively the same. So I assume that this probably isn't something out of folklore, and there probably is a science to this that we could probably figure out. And they look like they're diving into the occult to everybody on the outside, but realistically, they're connecting the dots and realizing that there's a commonality between all these things, and there is a root of science to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of the occult, Himmler again, he's one of the in Nazi Germany, Himmler is one of the most prominent leaders of the Reich who is neck deep in the occult.
Some say more powerful than Hitler because he was the guy that could chirp in his ear. So, I mean, yes, sometimes the guy that can chirp is more powerful than the leader themselves.
Yes, he had a lot of influence, and he created this Anerbe Society, which was like the state-funded esoteric society where they were sending out expeditions all over the globe. One I've already mentioned, that North Pole base they call Treasure Hunter. That was an Anerbe expedition to look for treasure. They did another expedition where they went to Tibet. They went to an ancient city where some of these texts about the Vimanas were being stored. And this is real. It's called the Forbidden City of Lhasa. And, you know, Hitler also, that was Himmler who set up the Tibet thing, but Hitler also had commissioned Hindu men from India who were familiar with the Vedic texts to come to Germany. So, yeah, I think they knew about this information, man. And, you know, when it goes back with the Mercury component of this, it goes back to what Billy Carson has said about the ancient Vimanas and about that technology. Carson said, you know, if you put Mercury in a torus like a tokamak and you magnetize the torus and you rotate the Mercury up to 60,000 RPMs, then you pressurize the torus by 250,000 atmospheres, and then you electrify it, you get anti-gravity properties. It's a ferrofluid vortex engine. It's alchemical flight. The Mahabharata talks about a nuclear war between Atlantis and the Rama Empire. And in that text, it talks about anti-gravity flying machines and nuclear power.
Kind of something weird to think about, too, just to throw this in here, a quick thing. You talk about the link between Atlantis and Egypt, and they always talk about those big light bulb looking things with like the snake looking thing through them, and everybody has their theories on it. But like, what if stuff like that may have potentially been some type of like atomic bomb that they were producing at that time? And it was something that Atlantis may have been destroyed by, that all of these old civilizations knew how to create, because they would take that component of their flying machine, put it inside of something that would break, and then just drop it on the ground from the flying machine.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like some straight Atlantis Disney type shit with those like blue fucking beam things that they drop down on everything.
Yes. But like it's what I was starting to see, like the dots that I connected here, is that Manfred is working on the bell, and other Nazi scientists are working on the bell in 1940s Germany. Those facilities get taken by the Russians. The Russians take the scientists as well. They get them back to Russia, back in the motherland. They put them back underground, and they start to further develop this technology, and they get nuclear fusion out of it, among who knows what else. But who knows if they developed anti-gravity machines as well. But it's the same technology like in the Mahabharata, right? Because they're talking about anti-gravity flying machines and nuclear power. So I think the same technology is responsible for both. I think the German bell was an attempt at flight, and the Russians developed that tech into nuclear fusion.
Something else kind of weird to think about that may still have some like old world history connection to this, and this will link in with the whole Kecksburg UFO incident. So with the Nazi bell, of course, I'm sure you're diving into it. They talk about like that having like Egyptian hieroglyphs like around the outside of it and stuff. So then fast forward a little bit to when the Kecksburg UFO incident happened, which I believe wasn't that 60s or 70s? I think it was 60s, right?
It was 65, I think.
65, yep, something like that. But so that thing, the way people described it, it was this bell shape. It looked almost identical to the Nazi bell. If you look up two pictures side by side, it has the hieroglyphs around the outside. And then one of the people that supposedly saw this thing land saw two men walk out supposedly wearing Nazi uniforms. So,
oh yeah, yeah.
So was the Kecksburg UFO incident actually the Nazi bell popping up somewhere else, be it either one through time travel or potentially through opening up a rift and coming out somewhere else? If they were potentially still testing and figuring this stuff out in Russia, you know, they could have been working on it in the 60s, and it may have been where it opened up some type of wormhole where they popped up in the United States and then came back and they were looking for some type of like wormhole type weapon.
Yeah.
Because what not a better way to, you know, attack the enemy than just popping up behind enemy lines in the middle of enemy lines? Like, you just drop a bomb, do anything you want, just pop up in the middle of like, you know, a populated area without anybody having any alert to you even being there in the first place.
Yeah. And then, you know, when you go real deep into this too, you find people who like T. Townsend Brown and Victor Schauberger, who back in the 1800s, for what evidence there is, it suggests that they figured out flight. They figured out some sort of anti-gravity type flight. And, you know, with this whole Mercury thing, you know, I'm calling it alchemical flight because I believe it's something that very much happened with components available here on the planet. You know, I think it really crystallized for me the moment I saw the small golden airplanes from like Colombia. Do you know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. They're like little toy airplanes that they made thousands of years ago, and a light came on for me. You know, I just think that some of the ancient cultures knew how to fly. I just think it's like
nothing new under the sun. You know, they know this, and it's a matter of like everything that we can need to figure out how to do everything is potentially already here. It's just a matter of figuring out how to use it. Like, think about how many materials on the planet, you know, we just don't know the full potential use of them. That, you know, give it another 20 years and, you know, we could completely construct something that's unfathomable. I mean, how many we've already done that through history, creating something that's unfathomable to people 10, 15 years ago that we have now, again, using stuff that we already have here.
Yeah.
As far as we know, that is, unless you get in, you know, the conspiracy that all technology is actually extraterrestrial technology handed down to us piece by piece.
Well, so I was looking for like sources outside of the US to try to just see what I'm missing, because Google, a lot of this stuff just doesn't come up on Google for whatever reason. You know, we've pretty much had that conversation already, but
do you use Brave browser, just out of curiosity, just to throw something out there to the listeners? Mm-hmm. If you guys want to search something that's not on Google search, use Brave, because a lot of people use DuckDuckGo. DuckDuckGo uses Google to get its search results, but Brave has its own search result system. So just to throw that out there to all the amateur researchers and stuff, if you want something different than Google, try Brave, not DuckDuckGo.
Yeah. Shane's absolutely right. I would just add on to that and say, Brave is, let this incentivize you to use Brave. You can watch YouTube on the Brave browser and it will, they won't show the ads.
And you can also buy stuff with crypto right off of the web browser. Just to throw that one in there for anybody that's into being able to do that without having any type of tie back. And
they, instead of showing you the ads, there's a way that they can pay you in crypto for the ads that you're not even watching. So it's a very interesting thing.
Dude, just Google search something on Google and then search something on Brave. See, that's become like the standard term, and you'd be surprised at how different the results are. Even just looking at basic stuff like non-conspiratorial things, you know, like the data that it pulls up is completely different than stuff you'll find on Google. Like, you look up Foo Fighters on Brave and you get Foo Fighters from World War II. You don't get the band Foo Fighters unless you type in Foo Fighters, the band.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Like, there's this guy here. I found this guy on Brave. I found his research on Brave. His name is Ankit Mishra. And I just have a couple little bullet points here of his research, but it's super interesting. He says he found that China found some of the old texts in Lhasa cities, that Tibet city we were talking about. He found texts in the Sanskrit language. I'm sorry, China found texts in Sanskrit there. They sent the text to Changdegarth University, to the Department of Sanskrit, who announced that the texts contain information on how to build an interstellar spaceship. He also says he found that the Mercury ion thruster technology used by NASA is also mentioned in the ancient text.
Just to throw something else kind of weird to think about too, we had that I forgot what it was called. It had a weird name. That like weird thing that flew into our flew around the sun and like warped back, and they said that they believe that may have been something like organic. What's that called? It begins with an M. It's like Maui Maui or Mooey Mooey or something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I mean, like going into the whole idea about like these ancestors not using necessarily the same type of technology or materials that we use, and how they may have been masterful in how to use stones in the same way that we're using metal to form technology. They talk about that thing being like almost a big organic rock type thing. That would completely make sense with like how we perceive that the ancients may have actually been able to build things. Because I mean, look at their stonework. I mean, it would completely make sense that if they were going to build some type of advanced technology flying ship, of course they're going to use what they're familiar with, and they're going to be using that stone that they clearly were masters of being able to build with. So for all we know, that could have been some type of ancient people that were here a long time ago, just doing a quick little like, hey, let's check out Earth real quick, back out.
Yeah. There's another guy, because I mentioned, like, I think, like, to go along with what you're saying, I think ancient people many thousands of years ago had figured out some type of flight. But I also think that somewhat more recent to our day and age, you had these guys like T. Townsend Brown and Schauberger, and then there's another guy here. His name is Shivar Talpade. In 1895, he invented a machine heavier than air that could actually fly. He did this 8 years before the Wright brothers. It flew at 15,000 feet for 18 minutes with the help of a mercury propulsion system. He built the machine with the help of the Vimana Sanstra, which was translated by this gentleman into Sanskrit.
I mean, this could have also linked in with some of the building of the pyramids too, and how they potentially could have moved these stones if they were able to use some type of zero gravity type device attached to stone. And then again, it kind of correlates into what I was saying about these potential ships that could have potentially been heavy and made out of stone. And just so that my little theory, just before I let you hop back in, doesn't sound so out there and crazy. I mean, we talk about all of these ancient societies like being really, really fixated on these disastrous events that were going to happen. Like they're fixed to the sky. Like they knew that there was going to be a cataclysm that was just around the corner. So assumably, if you have any type of advanced technology, your first logic is the safest way to protect ourselves from something happening to this planet is to get off the planet. And assumably, if you have some type of advanced technology that, again, we may not even understand how it worked today, you know, your logic is going to go there too, that the safest place is to just not be on the planet at all.
Mm-hmm.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. But before we get into this commercial break, if anybody is interested in supporting the show or any of the work I do over here, you guys can go and check out the OMM Patreon. Over there is 7-day free trials available for all of the tiers, and it is constantly updating with new shows and different stuff going on. You guys can also go and check out the OMM merch store, constantly getting updated with new designs, not just pertaining to the podcast themselves, but also cryptid, paranormal, and extraterrestrial related designs. And the third way you guys can support the show, if you guys think I deserve it, is that you guys can leave a 5-star review or rating for the show on iTunes or Spotify. And if you guys leave a 5-star review, of course, I will read it on the show and give you guys a big shout out. Now let's get to the commercial break so we can hop back in the show. And we are back. So let's hop right in.
And going back to, you mentioned the pyramids there, you know, there were mercury chambers beneath some of the pyramids being used for energy purposes of some sort. And, you know, I'll just throw one more thing in here with this researcher I found on Brave. He says he found out that a man named Dandib Vishwana Sastry, these are all like Indian guys, so forgive me on the pronunciations. This gentleman helped Hitler build a V8 rocket bomb pulse jet engine from the Ayurvedic texts. He decoded information from the text, as well on how to safely store missiles. So, and I looked into this. I looked into these guys. They're real people. That Ayurvedic text is like primarily a compilation of ritual offering formulas that were spoken out loud while another individual like performed a ritual before what they call the sacred fire. It's just part of the Vedas text. It's got all this cool stuff in here about Mercury and everything. And I see this and I go, is there this tantric technology where the Nazis studied the Sanskrit and figured out, I don't know, some sort of ancient UFO construction, right? That centers on the ancient use of Mercury.
I mean, I wouldn't even be surprised if they may have potentially made it into Mexico and tried to start digging into the Aztec stuff. I don't know if there's any roots to that if the Nazis were able to touch base in Mexico, but I feel like that would have been the next place to look as far as looking into this ancient technology. Because, I mean, how many times down in Mexico do you see those like drawings of the people that are in those weird flying devices where it almost kind of looks like a rectangle that goes around them with all the little intricate little pieces and they're kind of like leaned forward inside of it?
Yeah. Yeah. And the Nazis, that Aninurbe Society, they did an expedition to South America, and I just don't remember if they went to Pumapuku or Chichen Itza. I don't remember where they went, but
they found something probably right in Argentina, obviously, because that's part of where people potentially think Hitler went. So maybe there's more validity to that than people thought.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, the amount of Nazis and big name Nazis that went to Argentina is outstanding. It's staggering. The president of Argentina at the time, right after the war, was Juan Perón. He was a Nazi sympathizer. So not only was he allowing the Nazis in, he was helping facilitate their journey. He was helping to smuggle them into the country. He was teaming up with the Vatican and getting them to Argentina via these rat lines.
So is that the only connection as far as you've seen with the Nazis in Argentina, or were they already doing research in Argentina and that's why they had their connections there?
Their connections there, from what I understand, began because of an early German settlement there that I think really got going in like the late 1800s, maybe early 1900s. Germans, before the Nazi regime even, were attracted to Argentina for, I think jobs or something like that. Something really Manila like that.
So they already had pretty good previous connection into Argentina even before the war started then.
Yeah, there was a significant portion of the population who spoke German in Argentina, and that was a big reason for these Nazis to go there. Plus it's remote. Plus you've got this dictator who's a fascist sympathizer.
Hey, if you build yourself up, all you got to do is go north too. Then you can go back to the targets that you're mainly going for.
Yeah, and it's it's the tip of South America down there is not far. It's a jumping off point for Antarctica as well.
That too.
And yeah, they had a fascination with the region.
There's clearly something there. Otherwise, it's like they wouldn't have spent that much time and effort there. Like, it's not like they just were on some blind race to try to find something that they weren't sure that they were trying to find. Like, they were clearly geared at something specific that they were looking for in that area, that it wasn't just like a tale that it may have been there. Like, they were fixated on the fact that it was definitely there, whatever it may have been.
Yeah, and even before the war ended, they had U-boats out there. And the speculation is that the U-boats were going down to Antarctica, to that base, which, by the way, that Aninurbe Society I mentioned, they also did expeditions to Antarctica, proven. There's documents on it that really happened. So they were down there messing around. But after the war, these two U-boats surfaced right on the Argentinian coast.
Well, I mean, talk about a good dropping off point. If you created some type of underground base underneath an ice sheet, you just take the U-boats down and in, and you could have a stadium size area or even bigger than that that's just underneath the ice. And you could have full buildings in there, everything, and nobody would be able to find that shit. And you can just bring your U-boats to pick up supplies back over to Argentina and then bring it back down and up and around. Nobody even know where you went.
They were also using the U-boats to transport mercury. There's like several articles that have come out recently about that. One was Norway. I think it was 2018. They found a sunken U-boat and it had mercury on board to the point where they were, in the article, they're talking about how they're going to, put underwater concrete, sand, rubble on top of, they're going to bury this U-boat because of the amount of toxic mercury in it. So, and then there was another article from Israel about the wreckage of a U-boat. They think it wrecked in 1945 on a mission to supply Japan with advanced weapon technology, and it had 60 tons of mercury on board as well. So they were planning something big with that mercury.
I mean, even besides the mercury, I kind of wonder with these U-boats, it seems like most of the time they find these things, and rather than like putting them in museums and stuff like that, they completely like destroy these things. I mean, I wonder if the technology is a lot more advanced than what anybody thought was actually in these things, and it's a matter of like they destroy them so that nobody gets a hold of what they could have potentially been using for these things. Like they may have been way more advanced than any of us ever thought they were for the time.
Yeah, I mean, history
or
is always...
even possible destructive power that we never actually got to see these things use their full potential. I mean, these things could have had like a full-blown nuke escape plan in them where like if they got pinched into a corner, they could have just blew off like a giant nuclear explosion. So maybe that's like, bury all of them that you find, because all somebody has to do is go in this thing and hit a button. It could possibly cause some type of like catastrophic event,
Yeah.
Almost the same idea as like, the kamikazes, but you got to have that escape plan. I mean, they already had all the spies and everything taking the cyanide, got the tooth that's actually made out of cyanide. So it makes sense. You get pushed up on that corner, you just blow up the U-boat and take out as many as possible, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, they were messing with this stuff. They had their eye on advanced technology. The sky was the limit. You talked about the Foo Fighters. The Germans witnessed the Foo Fighters. That was something that happened during our dogfights. The Americans saw the Foo Fighters. I just had a guy on the podcast who wrote a whole book about it. There's that much evidence of the Foo Fighters being involved in these. The Foo Fighters, for people listening, are these UFOs that showed up during our dogfights in the skies over Germany and greater Europe. And I think the Germans saw this and said, hey, I want to build this. We'll see if we can do that. Because, like I said, they're ahead of their time. They have a space program. They were working on stuff that still blow people's minds. They had a aerial vehicle that would take people from Berlin to Tokyo in a few hours by bouncing off the top of the Earth's atmosphere. And what they wanted to do was, after they got to Tokyo, they wanted to try and land it on a U-boat out in the ocean. It's called a Silverbird. Why wouldn't they have tried to make anti-gravity vehicles?
Yeah, they're already pretty much there. They're making something that's just hopping off the sky. I mean, that's like literally the next step.
Man, I really do. I think the Germans saw the Foo Fighters and they said, let's create that. They're obsessed with high technology. We just don't know how far they got. And
I mean, for all we know, those Foo Fighters could have already been developed German technology, and it was a matter of like the same way the U.S. government kind of does this stuff. Not everybody is aware of what's going on. So, just because you're an average Nazi pilot doesn't mean you're going to be aware of like their secret programs. So, what I mean? They could have been like testing these things out to see what they could potentially do, while they still had other guys fighting up in the air. It's just coverage for them, testing out these things.
Yeah. Did you get that? I'm going to try to share
Yeah, I just hit accept. So it should give you the option now.
All right, cool. Because you brought up Kecksburg. And this is so you've got Kecksburg. You've got a couple of these modern sightings that resemble a Nazi bell. One is that 1965 Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. They call it the Pennsylvania Roswell. That's a good one, man. I mean, like you said, they got the hieroglyphics on the side of that thing. It was there's a documentary out, Small Town Monsters did on that. If anybody's interested in Kecksburg, go check that documentary out because it's cool. They talked to the locals. Even though it was in 1965, people still remember that. And another one that I found is this Colares UFO attack incident of 1977. This is a picture, a drawing of that.
For anybody that's just watching the audio, it almost looks like the shape of like a paper cup.
Mm-hmm. Upside down paper cup.
Yep.
That's it. And, this is, so, this, I got this from Reddit, and, the title says UFO, the Colares UFO attacks in 1977 look like the Alabama 1996 incident. I'm going to pull that up in a minute too, because that's another one of these Nazi Bell lookalikes. But
is that from the picture? Is that in meters? Is that saying 2 meters across the bottom? So 6 feet across the bottom, and then 3 meters tall. So about 9 feet tall by 6 feet tall, or 6 feet wide.
Yep. That's it, man.
I couldn't tell if that was a 4 or an M because it's like a pen drawing.
Yeah. And this person included a engineering type drawing of how it flew as well. So you see it goes up. It never really completely turns on its side. It kind of keeps the smaller cylinder top up facing north the whole time. Just very interesting stuff. Actually, I'll pull up that Alabama one too. This is the one from Alabama in 1996.
Looks exactly like a not square top, but a flat topped Kecksburg / Hitler Bell.
Yeah.
Or Nazi Bell.
If anybody wants to look this up, I think if you type in the Valley, Alabama UFO photographs of 1996, this will show up. So a guy in Alabama was out on his property. He's a public figure of some sort. He didn't want to give his name out because he gave this up to the local radio station, I think, and some other researchers. He's like, I just want to protect my identity because he had some sort of standing in the community. But he's like, he's on his property and he sees this thing and he takes this picture, and it looks like what you said. Essentially, it was a great analysis of this. The Colares incident of 1977 I looked into that, and this kind of goes back, I think, to maybe something that you said, where it's like, with all these Nazis being in South America, right? Hiding out in Argentina. One of the things they did was they were down there looking for what's called, I think it's called heavy water. They use that in the production of bombs. They were building dams down there. They were doing all this very advanced stuff in Argentina, and they had these bases out in the middle of the jungle. Half of them we still haven't had a chance to go look at. They're still out there. They're just unexplored bases. And
think about how many underground bases there could be too, that it's just a hatch in the middle of the jungle that nobody will ever rediscover.
Exactly. So it's like, what were they up to, and were they building this stuff, and were they building these anti-gravity crafts? And is that why in 1977 you see an event like Colares in Brazil? Because somebody's been working on this technology and now they're flying it around, right? And like this 1977 Brazil thing is crazy. It was local residents claimed that scars on their bodies were caused by the lights being seen in the sky. They named the lights Chupa Chupa, which means sucker sucker, because they believed the lights were sucking blood out of their bodies.
this
somehow.
People in South America with the whole like blood sucking concept, like everything that relates back is something that sucks blood. I swear, man.
Yeah.
I'll say anybody that follows cryptid stuff, chupacabra, goat sucker.
Yeah, exactly. And like this was such a big event that the people of Calares started organizing night vigils, lighting bonfires, and igniting fireworks, trying to keep the lights away.
We will be right back after this brief commercial break, so stay tuned. And we are back, so let's hop right in. Dude, this stuff still persists today too, because I had one person that came on, and I had to use like a translator because he spoke 100% Spanish, no English at all. And he's a UFO researcher from down in Mexico. And dude, like the UFO phenomenon in Mexico and South America is so beyond ridiculous that like the average person like sees this stuff on like a regular basis, at least from the people I talk about. And it's just a matter of like people just almost ignore it because it's just so open and out in the open. But like this researcher that I was talking to, pretty much he said anytime he goes out, it's like just a matter of like when is he going to see one, not if he's going to see one somewhere. And half the time he's noticed this weird thing too, where it's like he tries to record them and he says sometimes you won't see him at all. And then you record them with like these old VHSs and stuff. And then you'll pick up on him and you can 100% clearly see him. And then he'll try to use something digital and then it won't pick up or catch it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I've been working on a little side project into giants. And I was looking at this region of South America called Patagonia. And you know, totally unrelated to the giants, but what I found was there's this, they see the lights out there all the time, like you're saying, to the point where in one of the towns, the local police officers built a viewing platform because they see lights in that area so much. They built this platform for people to go out and just hang out at night and check out the lights. That's how like prevalent this is. And like, with this Brazil case, the mayor requested help from the Air Force. That's how real this got. And, you know, several pictures of the lights were recorded. The military looked at the pictures. The military remained skeptical. After 4 months, it says this operation was closed.
I think that we get a lot of skewed information from South America, just to throw this one out, though, because diving into the Peruvian face peelers, they claim that like the military came out, all of that. And there's been a few researchers that have actually gone there. Tim Alberino, one of them, and he said all the villagers said like nobody showed up. There was never military here. So sometimes I think it's a matter of controlling the narrative that the Americans will hear about all this weird stuff happening, or other people in other countries hear about this weird shit happening. And then as soon as they hear, oh, the government went and checked it out and said it was nothing, then instantly people are like, oh, okay, never mind. And it doesn't matter if they actually went or not. It's like, again, controlling the narrative that as soon as you hear the government checked it out, the average person's like, oh, must have been nothing.
Well, that's what they did with this case too. They said it's nothing. They closed the case. And then in 1997, after 2 decades, the captain of the military who checked into this case, he came out and gave an interview about it to a ufologist down there. And he actually, you know, came forward and said, no, it wasn't just nothing. And he recounted his experiences with these lights. And he talked about how his men saw them as well. And 3 months after that interview where he does this tell-all, he was found dead in his home.
Shocker.
They said he seemingly hung himself.
Always. They always hang themselves, or they accidentally hang themselves while pleasuring themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or they're suicidal, and then nobody asks questions.
Yeah. The only other thing, too, with this case that I did find interesting is it did catch the eye of Jack Valet. He looked into it. He said a number of individuals died as a result of these lights. They thought that the lights were firing upon them, and the injuries like consisted with radiation effects, of course.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I've had a bunch of people, I've had a few different researchers come on the show. One of them, Tim Schwartz, and he mentions how many stories he's collected of people who have gotten close to these UFOs and have gotten like radiation burns from them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a common trope within the whole UFO phenomenon. Just throw that one in there.
No, it is. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's something that I think people need to know about. Like even back to Mothman Point Pleasant,
People's eyes burning.
yeah, they were having these radiation-like effects on their body. It's all throughout these UFO cases. As far back as you go, people talk about radiation. I mean, to the point where I've looked deep into accounts that where the Department of Energy showed up. And they showed up with briefcases with these men in black types who go around to all the UFO encounter sites, and they just open up their kits like they've done it 1,000 times because of the radiation. So there's a group within the Department of Energy involved with this because of the radiation.
Weird thing to think about with extraterrestrials involving radiation. If all of their ships do contain some type of radioactive principle to it, it almost makes you wonder if it's something that like they're immune to it because it's something that may exist from whatever place that they're coming from, that it's not anything that is going to harm them. Or on the other side, if they do have an additional piece of technology that makes it so it doesn't harm them. And diving into some weird theories that I've thrown out before about this whole idea that I think that UFOs, they seem to be able to go through solid objects. So if you had a piece of technology that when you break everything down to like microscopic particles, everything is just vibrating particles. So if you're able to create a piece of technology that makes it so that your particles vibrate on a slightly different vibration, then theoretically you could pass through these solid objects because your particles are just dodging through and just passing through. So if you had a piece of technology like that could potentially do that, then radiation wouldn't have an effect on you. Because for anybody that doesn't know how radiation works, it shoots off little particles in every direction. They go through your body, and how much of it actually like hits your body is when you start getting radiation poisoning. So if you found a way that would make it so that like your body vibrates or these radiation particles don't actually make contact, I mean, one, like I said, it's either a piece of technology that they use to be able to be around radioactive things, or two, it's something that's natural to them so the radiation doesn't affect them. But then on the counter side of it, it makes you wonder if that is the case, if there's stuff within our atmosphere, within our world that like would affect them, how radiation affects us and the vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It kind of reminds me of spooky action at a distance as well. When you talk about these particles and how weird that they react, seemingly like metaphysically, they do impossibilities, like they pass through objects. We've noticed that, you've seen it. There's studies about that. They calculated and they've watched these particles go through objects, solid objects, and pass through to the other side. And then if there's an observer watching the particle, it reacts differently just because somebody's watching it. And I wonder how much that plays into this phenomena sometimes, because I don't know if if they're coming into our dimension, to what degree are they playing with that and playing with the rules, so to speak, of gravity and everything else, right? I don't know, this might be going a little in a wild direction, but like you ask the question, like, what is space? And that's a hotly contested thing in this community. Some people don't even believe in space anymore and all that, but I think there's something up there because we can observe our side of the known universe. And I was reading a book by Thomas Bearden. I was looking into some of his work, and he has this theory that space is the ether. And the way I see it, it's like ether is like this fruitcake that like forms around the earth. And when you pass through the firmament, you're going into this ether. But he takes it a step further and he says the ether is actually in another dimension. So our firmament, our atmosphere, there is a divider between our dimension and that dimension.
Almost like kind of like the bubble dimension theory, but rather than looking at it as like multiple bubbles next to each other, it's kind of like a bubble inside of a bubble inside of a bubble inside of a bubble, expanding out into wider universes.
Yeah. So if we're in the third dimension, which I think we are, perhaps the ether is the fourth dimension. and then perhaps you hit another layer. Beyond that, you're in the fifth, and so on and so forth. And Bearden even says that he thinks that gravity is a reaction of things in our dimension, like bouncing off of the neighboring dimension, essentially. It's just, it's something to think about.
See, I've always wondered if like space has more of the proper, like we think about it as like a big open vacuum, but I almost kind of wonder if it has more of the properties of like, people talk about the whole like plasma theory, just like something that's almost like a liquid, but not quite a liquid, because we do like all the training and everything for going into space, like in ocean and in the water, all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, there has to be like a reason why they specifically choose that. I mean, of course, it's probably the closest thing we have to this theoretical, vacuum of space, but I often wonder if it's a little bit different than what they perceive that it is, that it's actually another form of matter that we just haven't fully been able to understand yet, where it works more like how water would work than just a blank, wide open space.
Yeah. I think too, what a lot of researchers don't or won't factor in is like that there's this, yes, there is this potentially other dimension, but in that dimension, you have entities, you have this like astrotheological trickster who likes to dance with us on its terms, like it's playing a game. It's like the game is always stay one step ahead of the humans. And it goes back to like maybe my story too that I told in the beginning. I feel like whatever that was interacting with me on its terms.
Dangling the carrot.
Yes.
Got to make you follow the trail. Got to make you follow the rabbit trail. I didn't even intend to go down that road, but got to dangle the carrot to follow the rabbit trail.
Yeah, yeah. And it's always just out of grasp almost, It's something I picked up on from reading Kill as well. John Kill was frustrated with this, I think I got really into him to the point where I was reading his unpublished letters that he was writing to like his friends and his girlfriends. And so I was like somewhat able to follow his state of mind throughout the late 60s and into the 70s. And he really physically tried to chase down this phenomenon. He was constantly like trailing after the weird. And I think he got close to catching up to this enigma, whatever you want to call it. But like I found out too that this is a guy who was hitting these pockets of frustration because, when you can't conclusively catch that which you seek, you are at best just in a constant state of adapting and readapting a theory. And that's what I call the Kill conundrum. It's the carrot. At
the end of the book, or at the end of the Mothman prophecies, doesn't he have some line about like the phenomenon is always changing and ever changing and is just outside of grasp or something along those lines?
Absolutely. I think he was frustrated because he thought that he couldn't find real proof like that. And I'd argue that he did prove something.
He was on the trail of something. I mean, how many references did he make that when he was like in New York and he had these like weird Men in Black type guys following him? Like Mothman prophecies, 90% of that book was Men in Black and not so much actual Mothman itself, but just weird interactions with these people that came around after the encounters.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
and those are always a sure sell sign that you're onto something, because otherwise they'd have no reason to be following you. Yeah.
I mean, the amount of time that he sacrificed searching for this ancient cosmic intelligence is a form of proof, almost like his physical and mental dedication to the study of it is a form of proof. The weird stuff that happened to him as a result of him being out here looking for it, like trying to chase down the phenomenon, like the Men in Black showing up, like that's in a weird way a form of proof. If you wanted to take into account even like manifestation or maybe a form of like esoteric manifestation, if this thing did not exist before Keel, perhaps it existed because of Keel, right? Because he fixated
on it and almost created a tulpa so to speak, in like that area.
Yes. Egregorically, yeah, like a tulpa.
Because, I mean, it wasn't just his thought on it. It was the whole town's thought on this thing. So, I mean, like, the whole Mothman phenomenon as a whole could have maybe had its origins in something, but then later on, the phenomenon changed into being a tulpa, and the original thing that people were seeing wasn't actually there anymore, but they created this thought of something being there that actually brought itself into the physical because of so many people having their thoughts projected onto it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I did my best to try and track down where Kill was, when the Mothman thing started happening. And I couldn't get it down to like the exact day and time. I was looking through his letters. I was trying to figure out where he was, in that period of the late 60s. And he was out on the East Coast on the road. He was going from encounter situation to encounter situation and doing doing his thing. And like he was going around the time of the Mothman showing up in Point Pleasant. He was going up from Atlanta through Western North Carolina and up in the West Virginia. So he may have actually been in the car on the road in West Virginia around the same time the Injured Cold pops up and around the same time that the Mothman shows up. And so, how much of those entities coming into this dimension was perpetuated by the fact that there's Kill out there on the road, just a madman, like hunting down humanoids in real life, right?
Just trying to throw a bunch of stuff at him so he doesn't know which direction to go. They're like, here's a little Mothman, here's a little Men in Black, here's a little alien Injured Cold. They're like, which trail are you going to follow? You pick. It's like a pick your own path adventure. And he decided to pick all three. Inquiries of All Reality will be back after this brief commercial break, but just a quick reminder, don't forget to go and check out the awesome sponsors of the show, IKNOWSQUATCH, Cryptoteeology, Snarly Yow Natural Products, Oregon-ite, Dimension Devices, and Big Ape Threads. More information and discounts for those are all available down in the show description. Now feel free to fast forward through these commercials so we can hop right back into the show. And we are back, so let's get back to it.
I think you mentioned this too about the channeling. I think the Nazis, going back to the Nazis, may have been involved with ultra dimensional contact as well. I mean, that goes really deep. I tend to lose people sometimes when I go into that, like Vril Society and all that. But I do think that the Nazis were channeling. There might be something to that,
Oh, no doubt in my mind. I mean, if you believe in the spiritual, like, I don't think it's even a question if the Nazis were channeling or getting into dabbling in that stuff. It's like, if you believe in it, like 100%, like there's no doubt in my mind that the Nazis were into it.
Yeah. And I do, I'm a big proponent of there is a spiritual realm and we're in it. And I do think that they were playing around with some of these old occult manuscripts, and I know they were, like, back to that Anunnaki Society. What they were doing was the Anunnaki Society was following the German army. So as the German army conquers Europe, the Anunnaki Society teams are right behind them, going and collecting like the art from the museums and all that. But what's funny is the first thing they do before they hit the museums for art, they go to the Freemason lodges.
Dude, imagine how many occult books will never see the light of day that the Nazis had that potentially could be in that room down in the bottom of the Smithsonian at this point after they all got, team picks, but
yeah, or the Vatican or both. Yeah. And a lot of those books that they got from lodges and other metaphysical type, institutions, they shipped those off to the castles of Europe because the Nazis had a thing for castles. It's, I think I mentioned that Kasha Castle. That was one of the places where they were storing all this esoteric literature. And so they had these big piles of alchemy books, witchcraft books, Kabbalah, Freemasonry literature, you name it, sorcery stuff, you name it, they had it. And to the point where they had a division in the Nurbe Society that was a research group purely for this esoteric occult literature. And they went so far as to take that team and divide it up into 40 different studies of the occult. Like, that's not a cursory curiosity. They were into it to the point where they developed 40 different factions of people to look into stuff. So yeah, they were definitely looking into witchcraft and channeling and sorcery and soothsaying and all of that 100%. And like, one of those castles where they had all this literature was Huska Castle in the Czech Republic. Before the war ended, the locals noticed that the Germans had abandoned this castle, in a weird fly-by-night type of way. And they left dead soldiers there, dead Nazi soldiers. Now, a battle had not been fought there. This is a castle out in the middle of nowhere, Czech Republic. These guys didn't get killed in some sort of a conflict. They don't know how these soldiers died, but they left the soldiers where they had died. So there was just dead bodies laying around, and the Nazis were gone, and they left all this occult literature there. So the speculation is that they messed around and opened up a portal, and something came through and killed a couple guys and spooked the rest of them away. So,
I mean, how much of that do you see in the media? And you talk about the stuff that's programming. I mean, you put it in movies and people start associating it with fiction, but that kind of stuff's intentional, because why are there so many movies about the Nazis opening portals and doing this kind of stuff? Because they're trying to make it look like it's something from science fiction. So when you hear this kind of stuff, you instantly are like, oh, that's a movie. Or, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. Controlling the narrative, going back full circle to what we were saying in the beginning, man.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a great point, man. They do that, with a lot of the subjects that came up, I think, too, on my conversation with Janet when we were talking about cancer. And I'm not going to go down that rabbit trail, but I'll say this. They've made cancer look like it's this incurable disease. Like, it would be a miracle if somebody came up with a cure for cancer. They make it like you're saying, they make it like something out of science fiction. And I just think that that's the perfect analogy, man. It's like there's all these narratives set up to make people not believe things. And like, it's huge with the Nazis. It's just, it's more prevalent than you would think, it's just, and like, I've done my best on my podcast not to call out certain institutions just because I'm not trying to, I don't have a target. I don't want a target on my back, but there are some big name magazines out there who have these hit pieces on this Nazi information, completely calling things conspiracy theory that might not be conspiracy theory. I mean,
and who covers it? It's usually History Channel. And what have they gotten to the point now with History Channel is that when people think of History Channel, they don't think of history. Like, when we were kids, it was all World War II. It was this, it was that. Now, it's like ancient aliens, this, that. So it's like, even just by doing a documentary on the History Channel about it, they instantly are throwing it into that conspiracy realm at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. Von Braun, he wrote a book about a guy named Elon going to Mars. That just popped in my head. So, like, with the Nazis, it's like, it's always weird. It's always weird. They were into, and like, I don't want to say he was channeling, but was he channeling? How did he know that?
I mean, there's a lot of cases of that with a lot of weird books. So, I mean, like, you can look at it as coincidence, or you can look at it as there's definitely something to the whole channeling aspect, because how is it possible that there's so many of these books that are just obscure, that have been lost in history, that like hit stuff to a T?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
just a matter of having context after the time happens, because it just is nothing until you start getting to a point where it actually makes sense. So this book might be obscure for 200 years, then all of a sudden, hey, wait.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the Book of Enoch, man. It was found in a cave in 1947. And that book it's just very coincidental, or not coincidental at all, that book has just now shown back up again at this time in history. I know that was almost 100 years ago, but still.
I mean, talk about a bounce back, though, because it never disappeared in Ethiopia. It was just a matter of it like being rediscovered, and then they're like, oh, wait, we had it in Ethiopia.
Yeah. It went, I was going to say, I should have mentioned that too. I do believe that book was underground in like a private collection or something in Ethiopia. You know, I've heard that too, and it's compelling. But the rest of the world didn't know about that book, and now it's experiencing this revival. And it just, 1947 is the same year as Roswell. And in the Book of Enoch, it says that it's a book meant for a different era. It's almost a prophecy built into that book that it will be discovered in its rightful era, in its rightful time. And it shows up the same year as Roswell in the beginning of the modern UFO movement.
Yeah, and it makes sense with all of the whole like interdimensional multiple reality concepts.
Yeah. It shows up at a time where on the heels of this World War II being over, the world is changing. 1947 is like a threshold year for humanity. The CIA was started in 1947 as well. You've got Jack Parsons and L. Rod Hubbard out in the desert opening up portals. You've got a feeling in the air here in this country that the intelligence services are going to start having a role a massive role that they had never assumed before. It was in 1947, it was clear that the intelligence services were going to now disseminate information to the American people in a way that had never been done before. They were going to start swaying the way Americans looked at the world around them, down to their diet. They used Edward Bernays to introduce bacon into the American diet. They dotted their I's, man. And I just don't think it's a coincidence that all that happens in 1947. And then you've got this book, the Book of Enoch, and it's all about the spiritual realm. It's all about this hidden history of our past almost. It goes into depth about the sons of God and the Nephilim and this cosmic battle that was waged a long, long time ago that people didn't really know about because the Bible kind of skims over that part.
Or it was intentionally removed through time.
That's what I was going to say. The Book of Enoch was in the Bible at one point. It was taken out and then it goes underground, hangs out in Ethiopia for a while, and then it shows back up in 1947.
Same with the Book of Giants too. That's another one removed, but still was part of the original Bible.
Yeah.
And again, starting to come back into the light nowadays too, and everybody's diving back into the whole giant concepts. Yeah,
that's a book. I think the Book of Jasher is another one that kind of fits into all this as well. I've heard about the Book of Giants, but I haven't read that one. I have to look into that.
You can get it as this little pamphlet book. It was $7. It's not a really long one, but you can get off Amazon. It's a pretty quick, short read as far as biblical stuff goes, being a short read, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Giants is a new one for me. I'm very fascinated with it. And I think talk about misinformation on the internet. They don't want you to know about these giants at all.
Yeah, that stuff's been covered up since, 1940s? It seemed like there was this burst where they were all right, show us what you got. Then all of a sudden it was whoop, everything disappeared. You can go to South America and see some stuff, but you can't talk about too much of that stuff because all of a sudden that stuff's disappearing.
You know what else, man? The technology too that came out of this time period we're talking about that comes out of World War II and Roswell. Like a lot of this technology that will go on to define this new era in the internet comes from either the Nazis in 1947 or Roswell. You know, like a lot of fiber optics and circuitry tech mysteriously just shows up right after 1947 Roswell. They had those elements, tungsten and molybdenum, that were found at Roswell, and later they used those in like NASA spacecraft. And just the movement of technology in 47 was like very noticeable, and it was very obvious that like it was heading towards the internet and the world that we now find ourselves immersed in. And that's the era we live in, you know, the era of the internet, and it's brought about by a lot of these changes that we've discussed today.
And that's what I was about to bring up. I was gonna say the whole eugenics concept, just another thing that's been very 1940s, but it seems to be a concept that's coming up now, but it's disguised under a different mask. Where when you dive into eugenics, it's all about this like gene editing and everything versus them straight up trying to commit like a mass genocide of a specific type of people. Like it's just wearing a different mask, but it's the same phenomenon reemerging again.
Yeah, I've heard that described as genocide being rebranded, and I think it was Julian Huxley that first brought out this concept of eugenics as it's called eugenics. It's genocide with a bow on top, right?
Kind of a weird thing to think about, and not to get too fringy into this topic, but talking about the whole new age and eugenics concept, and you're trying to get rid of anything that you might potentially see as dead weight, you get into the whole like mental illness problem that's happening in today's society and the whole like woke ideology that goes with that. And what can you essentially push in and usher in is this whole idea where you're creating a generation of people with known mental illness that are sterilizing themselves and making it so that you're essentially, you know, kicking some of those mental illness genetics out of the gene pool. But you're not doing it in a mass genocide way, but rather a way that like is passive, that it's like, oh, you're doing what you want, good for you, but you know, your bloodline's going to die out now.
Wow, that's deep. That's deep. Yeah, I mean, eugenics.
Not even necessarily ethnic cleansing like how it's perceived before, but rather like getting rid of the dead weight of the genetics. You know what I mean? Like you don't want the people that are prone to illness of any sort, people that are prone to mental illness, people that are prone to that. You get rid of all that kind of stuff out of society, and then you end up with this you know, survival of the fittest type concept that only the ones that are the strongest are going to survive. So you have this new age eugenics concept where it's not race based, but rather getting rid of the defects within human beings.
Well, maybe that's part of the plan because, you know, that goes back to Darwin and Julian Huxley, and the Huxleys in general were huge proponents of Darwin at a time where evolution was just a theory. You know, one of the biggest early proponents of evolution was Julian Huxley's father. I think they called him the bulldog. They called him Darwin's bulldog. So that family, the guy who puts eugenics on the map, is they're very much involved with that idea that you said of the strong, only the strong will survive. You know, Aldous Huxley, he writes The Doors of Perception. That kind of brings in the sci-fi element to this as well.
Mm-hmm. Because then again, you're putting it under a whole new facade at that point. You're just pushing the narrative into a new direction. It's a step-by-step process that it's not like you can flip the script on something overnight. You have to do this step-by-step where you get to a point where the new mask is a perfect disguise where people can't even recognize it from what the original thing that it came from was, because it's this slow step-by-step to transition it into this new thing. Yeah.
And you know, sci-fi, I said that, sure, but I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you, and I'm also thinking about that book, that Doors of Perception. And I think the better comparison I should make is that Doors of Perception is like a 1984 type of book in a way, where it's a dystopian fiction, maybe more than it is sci-fi. I think it's a blend of both, but it's interesting that you have these pillars in the establishment, like the Huxleys, and they're putting out this material like that's dystopian fiction, almost like New World Order,
normalizing the concept, trickling it
Yes.
into society's
Yes.
mental in the background.
Yes.
For either one of two things. I mean, you can either one look at it from the trying to warn you that this is what we're going to become, or on the other side, normalizing the concept, because as soon as you write a story about something, the first thing people do when they read a story is they imagine themselves in that position and what they would do in those positions. So you're instantly putting people in that mindset to think about what they would do in those positions. So you're training their brain to, again, be in those situations, even, again, simply by writing a story about it, even if you have the intention of trying to write it to warn what we might become. Like people are already placing themselves in the story.
Perfect example of that would be Leave the World Behind, the movie that Obama put out. And it's funny because, or ironic, he makes a nod to the Huxleys in that movie, which I just found it to be, a little more than coincidental. But in Leave the World Behind, the neighbors are the Huxleys, and the Huxleys in this film had the inclination to get out of town. They're like the rich folks who made it to New Zealand to hide out. They got out of the chaos before it even started, almost like they knew something was coming. And now they're at their Bill Gates farm out in New Zealand, right? And they probably helped orchestrate it as well. They had the inclination that it was going to happen.
Sounds like all the CEOs and everything during 9/11. Where were they all at?
Yeah. Man. Yeah.
Ironic, everybody calls in on the same day.
Yeah. Yeah. Man. That was a big one for people. That was, 2020 was, like I mentioned earlier, 2020 is kind of what officially woke me up to the psyops, I guess, and to everything else. But I know a lot of people, for them, it was 9/11.
There's like one per generation, it seems. And it's like, this is your opportunity to wake up. And if you don't take it, you got to wait another 10 years, 20 years in some cases.
Vietnam, Gulf of Tonkin, Iraq, Afghanistan, of course, that's tied in with 9/11. 2008 housing market crash. There's a lot of these. There's a lot of these events that were, orchestrated by these wealthy shadow elites, I think. And then you've got, you see it in the movies too. You see it in the shows. I don't know. Have you ever seen that show, Mr. Robot?
It sounds really familiar, but I don't think I've seen it.
Man, it's like a handbook for the apocalypse type of show. Like, they just got so much right. It's like the way the world and the corporate world and the relationship between the corporate world and governments, the way that is in that show is it mirrors the truth of the way it is in real life. And I'm not even trying to make connections anymore, but that the same guy who did Leave the World Behind with Obama did that show, did Mr. Robot. So it's like, he's got his finger on the pulse.
So they clearly all have their agenda that they're working at.
Yeah.
Start connecting all the dots.
I think what it is like, I don't know if he's controlled opposition or if he's predictive programming or any of that stuff. I think there's a lot of that involved with Leave the World Behind. But I think with Mr. Robot, I do think it's a good show. And I do think he got a lot right. And somehow it came out just in time for there's no woke BS in that show. It came out right before all of that. So, and the guy who put it out, he's like a huge liberal. And so I'm not really sure how he got all this stuff right without like infecting it with his political stuff, you know, and like not to call out liberals. I'm just saying I'm not political at all. So I'm apolitical. So like, I don't like either one of them. So I'm not trying to just pick on liberals here, but I think what happened with him was after he does Mr. Robot, he works on this project that's going to leave the world behind. And Obama reaches out to him. And, you know, I just think he's a big enough liberal to where he's like, I can't tell Obama no. And I think that's how Obama got involved with the
There has to be a reason. It's not just like Obama one day was like, let's make a fucking movie.
Yeah.
My fellow Americans, we're going to work on a movie to scare the general public, but at least they'll know what we're working on.
Yeah, spot on, man.
Hold tight, guys. This is the last break, so stay tuned. And we are back, so let's hop right in. And kind of starting to wrap stuff up towards the end, I definitely want to come back around, man, because I definitely think we can do this one again and dive into some other stuff, because this was definitely a fun bounce back and forth. But I always like leaving the show with words of wisdom. And I know we've kind of been talking a little bit about words of wisdom, but if there's any words of wisdom you could bestow on the listeners today, what might it be?
Well, since we've been talking about false narratives and, you know, history that probably needs to be recorrected, and I do think that befalls on our generation. I think as many of us that have platforms and shows, as many of us who can try to recorrect history, I think it's going to be the better for mankind. You know, I think that story about Columbus and just North American history in general, giants included, a lot of that's just been covered up. You know, I go into a lot of that on my show. Clearly you do here as well. But my words of wisdom is I try to make it fun. I try to make it a learning experience, and I'm not black-pilled. I have hope. And if you listen to my show, or if you listen to Shayn's show, I think you run the risk of being black-pilled sometimes just because of the weight of some of this stuff. And my words of wisdom is, you know, always have hope and always not lost. Good wins in the end.
Sometimes, man, you can just sit back and laugh and watch the world burn. You know, be like Billy Madison when, catches himself on fire in that kitchen scene. He's just, ho, 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 ho. You can have a good time while watching the world burn, man, because if you're in a different place, you're fine. I mean, just because the world appears to be burning doesn't necessarily mean that it actually is burning. Mm-hmm. You have to sit back and see the comedy in reality. And if anybody wanted to come and check out your show, want to check out all of the awesome research and stuff you do, where can everybody find your show, and where can everybody find you on the internet, man?
Okay. Again, thanks for having me, man. This has been great. It's been really awesome getting to meet you and like just hearing your ideas. You've got a lot of great ideas, and I appreciate your perspective. I really do. If people want to find me, you can find me on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube, because I just started YouTube, so I'm really excited about that. My show is called Six Sensory. That's SIX. It's not the letter 6. It's spelled out. Six Sensory. It's Six Sensory Podcasts on Spotify and Apple. And then on YouTube, it's just Six Sensory.
And of course, I will include all those links down in the show description so everybody can find it quick and easy. And I really appreciate you making the time to come on today, man. Really looking forward to next time. And I'm curious where the conversation is going to go next time, because there's so many different avenues we could have went down on this one. And I felt like I had to cut it off because we're starting to get close to that 2 hours. But, you know, you kept leaving different rabbit trails. So I already have some ideas on what we can dive into on the next one, man.
Awesome. Yeah, let's talk. Let's do that.
If anyone would like to get in touch with me for any reason whatsoever, you guys can email me at inquiriesofallrealitypodcast@outlook.com, or you guys can get a hold of me through social media, Instagram or Facebook. Instagram is the one that I'm most active on, of course. Or you guys can get a hold of me through the submission forms, which are available on the link tree. The first one is to contact me, and the second one is to report an encounter. So guys, don't forget to report those encounters to omm@outlook.com. And every single thing that I mentioned throughout the show is all available on the link tree, which is available down in the show description. And with that, hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. Hope today's show has connected some dots in your own reality, and I'll catch you on the next one. Have a good night, everybody.